Okay, let's stick with the stories happening south of the border, because now traveling to the United States with your dog is about to get much more complicated. New rules by the American Centers for Disease Control will go into effect next month, and they say they're designed to protect the public from diseases that can be spread from dogs to humans, like rabies. CBC's Karina Roman is following the story for us and joins us now live from Ottawa. Karina, a complicated story. The health minister in this country held a news conference just this past hour. He said he was blindsided by these new requirements. I got to say, a lot of people seeming quite confused as to why this is coming up and how exactly it's going to impact dog owners on both sides of the border.
Well, and it will impact dog owners on both sides of the border, because we're talking about Canadian-owned dogs, but also Americans who come to Canada with their dogs and then have to return home are also subject to these new rules. So since some people are new to this story, let's go over what some of these new rules are. They were announced in May. You can't bring a dog across the border into the U.S. That's less than 6 months of age. The dogs have to be microchipped, and the original rules include a specific type of microchip. The dogs have to be have a certification of health, mostly to do with rabies, of course, by a vet within 30 days of travel to the U.S. There also was to be a certification of that validation from the vet by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the CFIA. An official was meant to sign off as well on that. And then there was a specific form from the Centers for Disease Control in the States that people had to fill out and bring to the border with them and their dog. And all of this to be in place August 1st. As you mentioned, this blindsided the Canadian government, health officials here, CFIA officials, veterinarians, and certainly dog owners. Health Minister Mark Holland said, in terms of being blindsided, part of that is because it doesn't make sense. Canada, this blanket policy for all countries, for all dogs entering the U.S. doesn't make sense for Canada, particularly the U.S.-Canada border. We're different than other countries where rabies, dog rabies, is present. And it makes no sense from, all the reasons why we want as easy a border as we can between two countries. And he used his own dog as an example. Have a listen.
I just pick on my dog, Bala. So if I show up at the border with Bala, they're going to have to look at a photo and look at Bala and be comparing, is Bala the right dog? Just frankly, I don't think this is a good use of border officers' time. So there's a lot of issues at the border, whether or not, my Maltese is another Maltese, and having a border officer figure that out, I've said to the Secretary, doesn't make sense to me. Secondly, we're all for proof of vaccination. Every dog in Canada should be vaccinated against rabies. But having these forms done by veterinarians in Canada is going to take a lot of time to get that validated, as well as making sure all dogs have this chip. It's going to cost a lot of money.
And those are just some of the negative impacts in terms of, the time. We have a veterinarian shortage in Canada and in many areas, especially rural areas where there might only be one vet. So having to get this certification from a vet is a drag on time. But Mark Holland also talked about the impact on tourism when we're talking about tourism of maybe Americans saying, well, I'm not going to go into Canada if I have to come back with all these new rules, but also Canadians going to the U.S., snowbirds, for example, going to Florida in the winter. He talked about long-haul truckers who often travel with their dogs and what this could mean for the supply chain between the U.S. and Canada. And, of course, border towns where people actually cross their borders with their dogs quite often. It's not just a one-time trip. So many impacts, he says, that the people who brought this in the U.S. weren't thinking about.
Okay, so clearly Mark Holland not too happy about these changes. Lots of people concerned about their little doggy buddies that they travel with. So what is Holland asking for?
Well, he's asking for a complete exemption for Canada, but he said in his conversations with his U.S. counterpart, they did get some things, but not all the things they were looking for. So he got a grace period, which means the August 1st deadline is a bit more fluid in that if people for a couple months will get off with a warning at the border if they don't have all this new paperwork in place. And as well, that there's no longer required requirement for the CFIA to provide this validation, but you will still need to get certification from your veterinarian, and you still have to make sure that your dog is microchipped with an ISO-compliant microchip. So that's not an exemption. He's grateful for the changes, says that will reduce chaos at the border, but he says conversations with Americans, both at the bureaucratic and political level, continue as Canada wants to push and continues to push for a full exemption.
Karina Roman in Ottawa, thank you.
You're welcome.